And again, I'll say welcome. Glad you could be here. Appreciate your presence. And please feel free to use the chat if you have a question as I'm going through this. If you'd like to say something, you could unmute yourself. That's fine too. Entirely up to you how you'd like to participate. So anxiety, what is it and what can I do about it? Vivian's my colleague. She works with me overseeing our employee and family resources, which I will be telling you about, but there's the main number and website, but I'll get you that as well. Oh, and we will be sending the slides out. So what I'll do is I'll send the slides out to the folks who have registered through LMS. So I have that list. If you did not register on LMS for some reason, maybe you got the link from a coworker or something, let me know if you want the slides and make sure you get them. Because there are some links, there are some phone numbers and things like that that you may want to follow up with. So you'll be able to do that. So first thing, just here's what we're going to cover today. Anxiety, assessing ourselves, learning a little bit about how the anxiety rates have increased. We've heard an awful lot about that, about the mental health crisis, some would say, and the demand for mental health services. And we'll talk about causes and risk factors. And also we'll spend a fair amount of time on treatment and available resources and strategies to use when anxiety is triggered. And we'll finish with a relaxation exercise. And I hope nobody got any anxiety trying to register and log in for this. I know it's not always easy going in through LMS and doing it that way, but it does make it a good way to kind of manage these kinds of sessions. So before I go into all that, just to give you a quick overview of Employee and Family Resource Services, just so you know, that is one resource for you to think about if you wanted to talk to somebody. But aside from the counseling, there's also work-life resource and referrals. So that can include anything and everything in your life that you might be looking for just to help find resources and balance work and life needs and information and resources for your family. As you can see, a whole lot of things listed there. And they really do a good job. It's a lot more in depth than a simple Google search, which we can all do. And we do a lot to find information for ourselves. But they will definitely search out resources, vet them, and get them to you in a quick period of time. So if you're looking for resources, keep that in mind. We also provide a legal and financial consultation. So you can either speak to an attorney or a financial specialist and then get some referrals. But if you wanted to retain that attorney, for example, for a particular issue, you will get discounted rates off of their services after that initial consultation. You may know we provide workplace support, so critical incident debriefings. We are connected to the peer support teams, which are growing. We're creating new teams at Bridgeport and Greenwich, and we're trying to recruit people from NEMG to join those teams. And we have existing teams in New Haven and Lawrence and Memorial. So we do work closely with them already, but also our service can provide workplace on-site support after traumatic, extraordinary events that are emotionally upsetting. So if you want that, or if your team or your department wants us to respond, you just really have to either give me a call or give the program a call. I'll show you that number in just a minute. And then there's the counseling, which of course is a big part of our service. So 6 visits completely free, no copay. You're not even using insurance at this point. You can go in person, by phone, or by video. Lots of choices, but there is a demand for these services. So please let me know if there's any problem accessing any of these. But they are licensed counselors in all these networks, and you should be able to get an appointment fairly quickly and It could be for any life issue whatsoever. Of course, anxiety, I'll show you the stats on that in just a minute. But the main thing to know about this is that it is completely confidential. These services are delivered by an outside company called Beacon Health Options. And so their records are totally separate from our hospital records. Nothing comes to my chart or Epic. So they can't give us any names or any identifying information of anybody who uses the service. So very, very confidential. There's the toll-free number right there as well. That is answered 24/7. So you can start the process. That's one way to start the process, by calling the number. The next is that there are online resources. There's one website that you see there, Achieve Solutions, that has a lot of content, a lot of information, locators, articles, webinars, videos, all kinds of great stuff. Tons of really helpful information. We're getting like thousands of our employees are using this. So check it out if you haven't already looked at that. And then another site there, the YNHHS mybeaconwellbeing.com, is a place where you can go and search actually and see bios of the counselors in this part of the network. These are all for telehealth sessions. And you can actually schedule right online with one of those counselors. You can see open appointment times and you can plug your name in. And so it's quite easy, and you get a whole list of options of people that you might want to see. A third way is through that same link, and it's Talkspace. You may have heard of Talkspace. Talkspace is a relatively new digital, online-based service where you can speak with a counselor. You can set up a video session, but you can also communicate via text, voice, or video messaging. So a little bit different than face-to-face or talk therapy. It's more, as I said, text, voice, or video messaging. So that's how you can get assistance through EFR. And let me know if you have any questions or concerns or problems. Feel free to reach out to me if there are any questions whatsoever. All right, so let's get into anxiety, and here's some definitions. So, reaction to real or imagined threat, and the imagined threat is kind of, I think, one of the key pieces here. We can easily, and we can relate to this, of course, in the last couple of years, and not just with the pandemic. And I'll show you a whole bunch of reasons that get our anxiety up, because of all the threats that could happen, right? General feelings of anxiety or dread. And then, these are a normal response to danger or extreme stress. So there's a lot of, part of the message here is there's a lot of normal reactions here. It's not always a disorder. But if you think of anxiety as the body's alarm clock, and it's kind of the alarm clock for the fight, flight, or freeze system in our brain. And so they give us the message to do something. That's what we get from the amygdala, like an alarm clock or a smoke detector. And we need those messages to give us, to show us that it's important. It's something that we need to do or not do or run from or be aware of in our environment. So, but sometimes our smoke alarm system could be a little broken. Maybe the wiring is a little bit sensitive. And similarly, some of us have wiring in our body system where the wiring is sensitive. And we're kind of on heightened alert. And maybe that alarm goes off and gives us the message when something is important, when maybe it may not be as important as our body's alarm is telling us. So we're going to talk about anxiety that actually impacts our life because the wiring is sensitive in a way that's disrupting us from doing what we really need to do, as it directs our attention away. Our reaction, for example, changes in our breath, the heart rate, feelings in the gut or the stomach, general feelings of uneasiness or dread are all part of that fight, flight, and freeze reaction. That's essentially what anxiety is. It's related to stress. It's not just stress, but it's related to stress. So the message is anxiety is not necessarily a bad thing when it's a normal response to danger or extreme stress. But when it continues to impact our life in a way that isn't working for us, then it can be considered a disorder. Okay, so let's just look at, I know we all know this intimately well, really, but looking at the events of the past couple of years and where we're at now in 2022. And so as we just kind of look at this list of things that we've been through and that are currently in our environment, right? It's no wonder that we're feeling anxious, that smoke detector and alarm system is very, very close to being set off with any little stressor, because all this stuff is sort of building up, right? And maybe there's others too. Think about perhaps there may be other things in your sphere, in your work life, in your personal life, that add to the overall dis-ease or unease, right? And even the way the workplace has changed. If you look at that quote, 1 of every 3 employees say their return to the workplace had a negative impact on their mental health, and they're feeling anxious and depressed. So that's a whole other factor. I mean, here we are talking on this Zoom platform. We didn't do this 2 years ago with regularity. We saw people, we connected with people in many, many different ways. So suffice it to say, our world is, basically turned upside down, and there are too many outside forces that really are heightening our anxiety. So you're not alone. I mean, and some of the stats, just to give you an idea, this particular chart, this is a lot of bars here. I apologize for that, but I'll point a couple things out. This is from our EFR stats that we get from the outside company. And this is from the first 2 quarters of 2022. You can see the highest category that people bring to the program is anxiety. And the second highest, or close to it, is stress. So closely related. The black line, the black bar here is year-to-date 2022. The red one is Beacon Health Options, the company that provides service. That's their book of business, similar industry class, so other hospital systems. You can see some comparisons, but you can see for us, anxiety is a little bit higher than it's ever been. It's always been high, as you can see in 2020 and 2021. What I don't have is 2019, so it'd be interesting to take a look at that, see it, but I'm pretty sure it was lower. So it's the highest levels plus stress, and it's also one of the highest reasons why people access behavioral health claims. Anxiety claims for psychotherapy, for example, is higher than it's ever been. So again, you're not alone. We're all feeling this. And I looked up for just in general, and WHO, the World Health Organization, says that there's been a 25% increase in anxiety and depression, and women and young people are hit the hardest. And then I looked at more closer to the US, and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says the rates of anxiety and depression among US adults were about 4 times higher between April of 2020 and August of 2021 than they were in 2019. So 4 times higher. That was, pretty much the peak of the pandemic. But they're still high. And some of the sharpest increases were among males, Asian Americans, young adults, and parents with children in the home. So I don't know, that says to me that pretty much we're all affected. We've all been impacted by all of these forces. And so, again, we're not alone. So let's look at a little bit of some of the causes. As you can see, the whole list here. So a person can be predisposed to anxiety. It's genetically transmitted, like blue eyes, dark skin, or large feet. Anxiety, unfortunately, is one of them. If a child has anxiety, it's quite common for a parent also to have it. And it's also one of the more transmittable disorders. However, you're not doomed to inherit it. If, say, for example, if you have some genetic factors in your family, there's plenty of anxious parents who have kids without anxiety and vice versa. So sometimes when people experience excessive anxiety without a matching life experience, genetics can play a part. There's even some studies that trauma and anxiety are linked together, that things that our ancestors have gone through, we carry in our own DNA. That's kind of interesting. So there's some interesting epigenetic studies. So different from genetics or having bad things happen in trauma is our biochemistry. And here we have, we all have different chemicals, neurochemicals, just like with other illnesses. So we can be predisposed in this way too. And then, of course, there's personality. And we know that people are born with different temperaments. So traits that make them more susceptible to anxiety. They have more sensitive wiring. Maybe you've heard of the type A personality, for example, or someone who's more obsessive or compulsive. And then, of course, there's life events. Life events can cause people to be anxious, being a victim of a crime or experiencing a war type situation or racism. These are events that can cause anxiety, and of course, rightfully so. And finally, looking at substance use and abuse, substance use and abuse can lead to anxiety. Also, people use substances to kind of self-medicate or handle their anxiety. That's very common. Alcohol and drugs can be a sort of a flight part of the fight, flight, freeze reaction, which is the same as anxiety. So, essentially we're using alcohol or drugs to get away from the stress and anxiety in our lives. So those are some of the causes. Now, if we begin to just look at how can we assess our own anxiety, what I've got here for you are links. So again, I'll send you these slides so that you can just connect into any one of these. Maybe what I'll do, well, let's go through these quickly. The first three are off of our website. And it's essentially the Achieve Solutions site. We have a number of different assessment quizzes, and I just put the three that are kind of pertinent. Is anxiety a challenge? Does your child have anxiety? And how well do you manage stress? So those are off of the Achieve Solutions. Then there's another one that we pulled that you can link to very easily and take it online. It's based on the GAD-7, which is the General Anxiety Disorder 7, so there's 7 questions. And this particular one is from the Mental Health America site. And again, you can go to that link, that'll take you right there. You can answer the 7 questions and you'll get an answer right away. But I'm sort of assuming that since you're here, you're, kind of curious about it for yourself or someone you're close to. And so, you're probably experiencing it, as many of us are in some way. But those are great ways to assess and then decide what you want to do next. So let's go into types of anxieties. There are a number of different types of anxiety disorders. The largest probably is kind of a catch-all category of generalized anxiety disorder. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in another slide. It's one of the more common ones. And so we'll get a little bit more into detail and actually into all of these. There's panic disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, specific phobias, social anxiety disorders, and post-traumatic stress, which of course we've been hearing a lot about. There's been an awful lot of feeling that what we've been through has been post-traumatic stress. So one point about that is that you may have had, and probably all of us have had, traumatic stress. Doesn't mean that it will lead to PTSD. You might have post-traumatic stress symptoms. Well, actually, that's a point for all of these. You might have symptoms of any of these, yet it may not be, to the point of being a disorder. The only way, this is all based on the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is used in psychiatry and behavioral health. And frankly, one of the reasons it's used is for insurance health claims. So to have a diagnosis to put in to be reimbursed for. So I kind of keep that in mind too. These are different categories that are from that DSM-5. So this look at general anxiety disorder and some of the differences between what we might consider normal worry or everyday worry versus the disordered part. And if you look on the left-hand side, and then compare them point by point. So first one being your worrying doesn't get in the way of daily activities and responsibilities. And on the right-hand side, your worrying significantly disrupts your job activities or social life. And each one you'll see going down, able to control, uncontrollable. Your worries, while unpleasant, don't cause significant distress. With GAD, your worries are extremely upsetting and stressful. Worries are limited to specific small number of realistic concerns. You worry about all sorts of things and tend to expect the worst. You can sort of see that the right-hand column, or when we get into the general anxiety disorder, is where we begin to it's really getting, more serious and more severe. And then the last one, your bouts of worrying last only for a short period of time. But with GAD, you've been worrying almost every day for at least, I see a typo there, for at least 6 months. So people with general anxiety disorder, when it's gotten to that point, and I guess that's part of the message, I think, is that while we may all have experienced a whole variety of anxiety symptoms because of all those conditions that I've mentioned, doesn't mean we'll automatically have a disorder, but I think we can all relate to the symptomology, right? So you can think of it as a spectrum. And I think it's one of the reasons why you're here, probably wanting to find some ways to interrupt that or mitigate, what getting to that point. So we'll get to that in just in a few moments. So general anxiety disorder, people with this usually have difficulty concentrating. Your mind may feel like it's pulled in, 9 million directions. That's why mindfulness can be helpful. And it's hard to live with constant worry. It's exhausting, right? It's emotionally and physically exhausting. Sort of like treading water fervently for hours and hours. That's what the inner system could feel like when you're more in the right-hand column of things. So the other part here is, if you can look at it this way, we can break it down to emotional, behavioral, and physical symptoms. So you can see with emotional, the worry, the nervousness, feelings of dread, crying, emotional ups and downs. Behavioral, difficulty concentrating, avoiding situations that make you anxious, and that's pretty common, I'd say. Restlessness and becoming easily fatigued. As I said, it's exhausting. And then physical, and this is one of the areas that I think a lot of people experience: stomach issues or muscle tightness and tension, and or sleep problems. Very, very hard to relax, obviously, with this kind of a situation. So, and there is a quite high correlation with physical gastroenterology kind of symptoms. So let's go through some of the others quickly. This is panic disorder. It's a different type of anxiety where a person kind of becomes afraid of their body-based symptoms. So the symptoms usually come on very suddenly. The alarm goes off in the body, and you might experience a racing heart, feeling dizzy, feeling like you might pass out, the need to run and try to escape, but there's nothing directly there, perhaps. It's more kind of in our minds. And sometimes people end up in the emergency room thinking they're having a heart attack. It can be that severe. So as you can see, the bullet list here, just with some other details about that. Unexpectedly, begins usually in adulthood. There's a link here to other symptoms, but pretty much that covers it. And only about 2 to 3% of Americans experience panic disorder. But again, this is panic disorder. You may have experienced some of these symptoms, not have the disorder. So many people don't know that their disorder is real and highly responsive to treatment. I mean, that's one of the biggest messages probably of this presentation, is that there are things that you can do. It can be very treatable. I mean, even if you've tried some things before, I'd say, when we get to some of the later slides, you'll see some things that we can all try. So here's obsessive compulsive disorder and phobias. So the obsessive chronic, lasting, uncontrollable thoughts that repeatedly enter your mind. So kind of intrusive, unwanted. They're just sort of, our thinking is somewhat out of control. Or our compulsions, our impulses to do something may not make sense, but in a way they help us feel in control of a situation, and they may actually help us feel better. Then there's phobias, which are more of an intense fear about something that's kind of out of kilter, doesn't really match the situation. And it's usually persistent, prolonged, and the person's life is impacted in some way. Usually most of these, where we get into the disorder part, again, remember this, they get to the point where it's disrupting their life. So OCD disrupts your life, and you might be trying hard to make the thoughts go away or not do some of the compulsions, but over time they actually get worse. So things like bridges, planes, elevators, bugs, there's all sorts of different phobias. Lots of times we find ways to get around these things. I mean, how many times have you heard of somebody who has a fear of flying? But most people find a way to white knuckle it or do something to take care of their anxiety if they really need to get on a plane. But there are some natural ways to do that. And again, we'll talk about some of those. Here are social anxiety and PTSD. So social anxiety, when a person has an intense feel of doing things, perhaps in front of people, kind of related to performance anxiety, the feeling that, we're being judged by other people, that we're feeling not measuring up to the situation. And it keeps us obviously from doing things, going places, going to places where there's social connections and where you might feel singled out. And then, of course, PTSD. And here's the basic, couple of sentence definition. It's from an event that causes an intense fear of your physical well-being, and the thought that you would die or almost die. I mean, it's really that kind of life-threatening kind of event. Can be very intense, humiliation or shame or injury as well. So often with PTSD, there are flashbacks, and person is hypervigilant. I mean, often we think, and we know many people who experience, war experiences, being in direct action, have come back with PTSD. And so they're, anything that reminds them of that, say, for example, fireworks, reminding them of gunshots, or there's intrusive thoughts and nightmares, tense anxiety, even some disassociation. So kind of just briefly touching on that, PTSD could probably be a workshop in itself. And so we're just trying to kind of go through some of this kind of quickly. Obviously, there is going to be a direct effect on the family. And as you can see, at least 8.4 million people in the US provide care to an adult with a mental or emotional health issue. And caregivers of adults with mental or emotional health issues spend an average of 32 hours a week providing care. So big impact on the family. I think we could all probably relate to that in some way. The people that we're close to and our loved ones are going to be feeling our emotional barometer in a sense. And also an impact on the workplace. So you can just see some of the things that we see in the workplace here. It's pretty hard to, when it gets to the later stage or when it gets to more of a disorder, is going to show up in some of these ways in terms of a negative impact on the work that we do, on the performance and the interpersonal kinds of reactions that we might have. So again, those are the more serious side of, when it kind of begins to coalesce into a more of a condition or a disorder as opposed to more individual symptoms. So let me just pause there. Next slide, I'm going to go into treatment and resources. But before I kind of get into that, are there any questions? I kind of went through a lot of that. There was a lot of information there. So just want to see if anybody has any questions. You can use the chat or feel free to speak up. Okay, well, feel free to add something in there if you would like. I'm happy to try to respond to that at the end as well. So let's just look at some of the treatment possibilities. I mean, we all know about psychotherapy or talk therapy. So what I would say about that is consider EFR to get started. It's a great place to get started. You can use the 6 sessions. The 6 sessions are available for unique problems, for example. So if you already used it once this year, but this is a different situation, you can use it if it's uniquely different problem that you're seeking assistance for. 6 sessions may be enough, but it may not. So what I would suggest is if you think that your course of treatment may go beyond 6 sessions, I would call the phone number that I showed you before, the 877 number for EFR, because that's going to put you into the local network. And what you want to do is when you find a counselor, you want to find out if they're in your health insurance plan. And of course, if you're insured by the health system, it's going to be going to Cigna as of January 1st. So you do want to check that out ahead of time if you think you're going to continue after the 6 sessions, because then you could do the 6 free sessions under EFR. And then if that person's in the network in Cigna, for example, you would be able to continue and using the copay for that. So great way to get started. Now, medication is the other obvious thing that we all know about, of course, being in the field, in the healthcare field. But so just a few words about medication. There's a great little overview article here that links to a WebMD article that covers medication and therapy. So first of all, for medication, you have antidepressants actually sometimes are prescribed. The SSRIs are used to treat and prevent a variety of anxiety disorders. So this could be like Lexapro, Prozac, Zoloft, Cymbalta. Those are some of the perhaps common ones that you might be familiar with. And then there are antihistamines actually too. And these are, and beta blockers can help with mild cases of anxiety as well as performance anxiety and which is a type of social anxiety. Then there are the more acute, for panic attacks, for example. But I think a lot of people are being prescribed benzodiazepines. So these are the more common anti-anxiety drugs: Xanax, Klonopin, Librium, Valium, Ativan. Those are some of the ones that I'm sure you've heard of. They do have drawbacks, and I think you do have to be careful with these. Sometimes they can cause drowsiness, irritability, dizziness, memory and attention problems, and physical dependence. So if they're taken for a long period of time, you can actually get dependent on benzos. So you got to be careful with them. Another anti-anxiety drug in this article that I mentioned is Buspar. It has fewer side effects than the benzodiazepines and is not as associated with dependence. Buspar, however, can have its own side effects and may not always be as effective when a person has taken benzodiazepines in the past. Now, of course, there are the therapies, psychotherapy, as I mentioned. There are some specific evidence-based psychotherapies that can be helpful. One of them is cognitive behavioral therapy. I have that listed there. There's actually a link to an article that talks about CBT and yoga showing long-term improvements in anxiety and insomnia. So that's one of them. There's also psychodynamic psychotherapy, which is just really another particular type of therapy, and supportive expressive therapy, which focuses on anxiety as an outgrowth of feelings about important relationships. Cognitive behavioral, getting back to that for a second, involves learning behavioral relaxation techniques, which we're going to cover a couple of those, as well as restructuring patterns of thinking that foster anxiety. So the difference here is that we really look at some of the thoughts that come up, and we begin to challenge them in a sense. We begin to ask ourselves, is it true? Is it helpful? Because oftentimes what we find with anxiety is we're projecting, right? And so it helps us to stop and pause, and I'm going to show you a couple of ways to do that before we close. There's also, of course, yoga itself, often been associated with very helpful with anxiety. And then any kind of movement or exercise can also be helpful. Dance, sports kind of movement can be helpful. It makes sense that just expelling some of that energy can be helpful. The next bullet there for unwinding anxiety is from Dr. Judd Brewer, who's got a great, there's 3 resources that you might check out. There's a YouTube, a couple of nice YouTubes if you just want to hear him talk about what he calls unwinding anxiety. There's a whole relatively new book called Unwinding Anxiety. And then there's an online course. And the online course, you can actually take the first few sessions free and just decide if that's something that you're interested in. You can also find very good courses on 10% Happier, which is an app, and Insight Timer. Insight Timer is actually free, the app itself, but if you want to take the courses, there is a charge for that. So usually when you get into the courses, which like the 10% Happier course is quite good. I took it myself. It's like 10 different sessions. They only last about 10, 15 minutes long, each one, and you go through them at your own pace. So that's a good one to keep in mind. And then there are support groups. And again, if you're looking for support groups, related to a particular type of anxiety, you should call a program. We can help you find them if you're looking for specific resources. So another resource that I think is, and this is also from 10% Happier, but this link goes to their blog. So if you want to read the entire article, it's called "Anxiety is Not the Problem. The Problem is Our Relationship to Anxiety." So this is just gives you a little bit of a taste of what this is by Dr. Luana Marquez, who's a psychologist from Harvard. And she says, when we get anxious, the amygdala, there's that amygdala again, the threat center of our brain turns on, which in turn turns off our prefrontal cortex, the thinking, executive, functioning part of the brain. As a result, we see the world in a distorted way. We start to misinterpret information as threat and believe that our thoughts are facts instead of just thoughts. And we may feel that something bad is about to happen. And so we start to feel more and more anxious. And it kind of becomes a vicious cycle. And that's what she calls the TEB cycle, which I believe Dr. Brewer also talks about this. And the TEB cycle has us looking at our thoughts. So in other words, when there's a trigger and something makes us feel anxious, we want to approach this with an attitude of curiosity and explore what thoughts are going on. And you might ask yourself, what thoughts am I thinking? What am I saying to myself about this situation? What's my perception and what are my beliefs about what's happening here? So it's an inquiry into our thoughts. And then secondly, kind of looking at the emotional reaction. And again, simply asking ourselves, how do I feel right now? What kind of emotion is this bringing up, truly bringing up, other than the anxiety? What else can you detect? Is it fear-based? Or is it related to some other emotion? It could be a number of things. And then finally, looking at how we're feeling and how checking in to the body. Actually, there's one more step. So pausing and trying to slow down so that we can sense where we're feeling this in the body. And we'll do a quick exercise before we close, and you'll get a sense of that. The third part is the behavior part. So asking ourselves, what am I doing right now? What do I want to do? Do I want to avoid it? Do I want to get away from it? And how might I change that? Okay, so looking at what your options are. It's really kind of a slowing down in a mindful way of the whole process. The Break the Worry Addiction from Tara Brach is simply the idea that, again, it's become an addiction. Our worry thoughts have become sort of this vicious cycle that it's hard to break. And what she does is she includes in that when we begin to sense it in our body, what message can we send ourselves to soothe ourselves and to kind of bring the anxiety down? So it's really, this is all mindfulness based. It helps us be aware of our thoughts and where we feel anxiety in the body and how to be with it with some self-compassion. Because I think the other part, and if you look at this kind of next sort of quick equation that gets in the way, is we have a stressor, but if you add in rumination or self-criticism or stoicism, in other words, stuffing it or minimizing it, that's what makes it into anxiety. It's the rumination, the self-criticism, or stoicism. Or put another way, as our friend Mark Twain says, my life has been filled with terrible misfortunes, most of which never happened. And then finally, another way from quotes to look at it is we are not troubled by things, the things themselves, but by the opinions we have about things. And William James, well-known American psychologist, the greatest weapon against stress is our ability to choose one thought over another. So the last thing that I would like to do is run you through a little exercise. We were trying to finish this, and I see that it's almost 4:50 now, so if you have to leave, I understand, but if you can hang on for another 5 minutes, I'll do this exercise with you called Taming Anxiety, Facing the Stress and Anxiety, and Soothing. So just simply take a position that's upright and alert and comfortable, and take a moment to just allow yourself to settle in your body. Maybe take a couple of deep breaths. And especially on the out breath, allow yourself to relax a little bit. Allow the shoulders to drop. Allow the jaw to unclench. A couple more deep breaths, letting the body settle. And you can close your eyes if you wish. You don't have to, but it might help to close the eyes, whichever you're most comfortable with. And as you ease into this, find your anchor, which is that place in your body where you feel a sense of ease. The anchor can also be found as you feel that place where you feel a sense of stillness or a sense of density and solidity of your body connecting with the ground. The anchor can also be found by feeling the expansion and contraction of the breath, breathing itself in and out. So just feel the body anchoring yourself, feel the breath also as an anchor that you can return to anytime. So I'm going to invite you to bring to mind something that's mildly or moderately stressful. Okay, now, really, the key is mild or moderate. And if you don't want to, you can just keep focusing on the anchor. That's perfectly fine as well. So if it's okay, tune into this stress or anxiety situation and take a moment and simply notice what arises. Notice what thoughts come up. What are you saying to yourself about this situation? Then notice what feelings are present. We're just noticing. We're not trying to fix or change anything. And see if you can allow any feelings to just be there. And then bring your awareness into the body and see if you can notice where you feel this situation in the body. Where does the stress or anxiety express itself? Maybe there's some tightness in the chest, or agitation in the belly, or tension in the shoulders, or back or jaw. Just see where you feel it. And see if you can stay with it a bit and even stand back a bit from it. Give it some space. See how it changes. Does it stay the same or get better or worse? Now, feel free to breathe into that area, diffusing it, and then breathing it out, kind of expelling it on the out breath. So breathe in, diffusing it with a nice deep breath. And as you breathe out, expelling it, letting it kind of drain out and release on the out breath. And then offer yourself some comfort or care the way you would to a good friend, and sense what message might be most comforting to your anxious self. It might be something like, "It's okay, I'm with you. or this will pass, or you're fine in this moment, whatever it is, just kind of send yourself that soothing message. And you might even place your hand on your heart as you do this. It kind of offers a physical gesture of kindness to the vulnerability inside you. So being able to see the pieces of the things that bring up our anxiety can allow us to challenge the distortions of the mind. And instead of getting lost in the story that the mind's created, take some time to keep practicing knowing what is. What is the reality of it? What's happening right now, and is it true? This projections, the story that comes up. This practice of getting curious about what makes up our experience can really support us in seeing things right-sized when the mind wants to make them something bigger than it is. And you're practicing being able to know when your anxiety is rising in your body, to pause, to turn towards it instead of avoid it, and ask yourself, is this really true? Does it need to be attended to right now? Is this urgent? Or can I let it be? Let it pass away? All right, so when you're ready, you can deepen your breath. You can kind of relax if you feel a little bit more tension. Again, feeling that contact between the body and the floor. And when you're ready, slowly open the eyes if they were closed, and looking around the environment and reorienting yourself. And I hope this practice has been helpful. So please begin to continue challenging your inner narratives by opening up all your senses to see what is really there, to see what is true. So be well, and I want to thank you very much for joining, and I appreciate you participating. And I'll just open it up one last time. Any questions or comments before I let you go?
Thanks, Bud. This was helpful.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. I will send the slides out, as I said, and again, appreciate you being here.
Have a good evening.
Thank you so much.
Too. Thank you all.
Good night, Bud.
Night, Roberta. Take care.
You too.